Okay, we're going to test this out. We're going to see how this goes. This is a attempt at trying to get some distance learning going on for advanced placement psychology with the COVID-19 outbreak, canceling school for the foreseeable future. Um, First things being first, today is March 15th, 2020, and uh, to update any questions you guys have, I have no further information about the closures. I know teachers will be going in tomorrow to discuss distance learning, what that's going to look like, expectations for students. So if you want to hit me on a remind with any questions that you have, or if there's something specific with the content, I am planning on being in Danville at the Gilbert Mad Goat from 10 till 2. I invite you guys to come on in if there are specific questions that you have, either about what we're going to do with the closures or about content, about the AP test, about FRQs. But we'll definitely be kind of rolling with the punches with this one. So typically, I let you guys know about what the week ahead is going to look like, the day-by-day schedule, but obviously that's going to be something that is going to be much more difficult to do with the situation. Everybody's calendars is a little bit different. And so all we're going to be doing is what is our agenda in terms of what do we need to get done? What do we need to finish? So for this upcoming week, I'm going to treat it as if we're doing what we were planning on doing in the first place, which is finishing the notes on modules 72 and 73. 72 is evaluating psychotherapies and prevention strategies, and 74 is all about what we call psycho or biomedical therapies. My hope is that you guys get done with those notes by March 18th, which would be Wednesday. I'm going to try to come up with a online version of the quiz available to you guys on Thursday, 3/19, and then having some form of the Unit 12-13 test by Friday. Now, obviously, the questions come up about online tests. What would prevent a student from sitting there taking the test while they have their textbook in front of them, and truthfully, I don't have an answer for that. I don't know how to control for that variable. I don't even know if it's a variable worth controlling over, since I'm sure that there are plenty of sophisticated ways that students can get around any limitations that a professor or teacher might put on them. For next week, which would have been spring break week, I think for me, I'm just going to start working about FRQs, making a plan on if the delay goes any longer. Um, so one thing I wanted to mention, we talked about this in class, in order to remind you guys that we still have about 25% of the content left to cover in between units 12 to 14. Your two final tests of the year, one of them will be doubled. Whichever one ends up being the higher score, I'll enter it in twice, which will have a positive effect for many of you, and hopefully provide you with extra motivation to push through and keep focused. Now, a couple of things that we didn't quite get to on Friday before we left were, okay, we talked about psychotherapy, we talked about the different approaches, we talked about psychodynamic, we talked about psychoanalytic, psychodynamic, humanist, those insight therapies, and then we talked about behavioral, cognitive, and then the combination of the two, the cognitive behavioral therapies. Of course, you guys know the term that we use for somebody who uses a little bit of all the different approaches, beginning with an E, and I'm sure a couple of you said eclectic, so thank you. I appreciate your participation in this. Maybe eventually we'll get to a point, maybe we'll do some live streaming with this if it works at all, if I'm happy with this, if I'm able to figure it out. So let's talk. What are the three elements shared by all forms of psychotherapy, regardless of which one you go with? Well, the first one is hope. The goal is to be able to provide the patient, the client, whichever term is appropriate for your type of therapy, that they're going to get better. People with these disorders oftentimes have suffered for weeks, months, years with their condition, and so they feel very alone. They feel like their disorder is bigger than they are, and this gives them an opportunity to realize there may be light at the end of the tunnel, especially if they're working with somebody who has gained their trust and is somebody who they believe in, and that's part of the second second element that we see in most forms of psychotherapy is that it offers people a new perspective. A lot of times people get into a negative way of thinking about their disorders and can't overcome that one perspective until somebody without a bias, without knowing that person on a personal level, but only in a therapeutic session, therapeutic way, is able to give them a new point of view. The third element is all about the relationship between the therapist and between the client and the patient, is that I have somebody who believes in me, I have somebody who's working, who's trying to help me. Now, when we're talking about therapy, when we're talking about effectiveness of therapy, one of the biggest factors is what role does culture, gender, and values have in that relationship? If the relationship is that important, what sort of therapist, can I build a relationship with? We'll realize that the therapist's own views, perspectives, their own goal of therapy will go ahead and influence how effective it is. The stereotypical example that comes to mind is when there's a difference between the therapist and the client in terms of culture, gender, values, religion, and background, there can potentially be conflict. That example being a white male heterosexual therapist working with a female immigrant mother, particularly from Asia, somebody from a collectivist culture, that his outcomes, his goals for her, oh, well, you should do what makes you happy, it can potentially lead to conflict with her, whose own happiness never really kind of registered in her mind, from a cultural point of view at least. Now, let's say you're shopping for a therapist. Let's say that you're interested in actually going to therapy yourself. Well, what should you look for? There's no one type of therapy that's better than any others. Certain therapies are going to work with different disorders, but the most important things are, is this somebody you can trust? And how do we establish that you can trust them? Well, you're not going to trust somebody whose therapy doesn't make sense to you. It's easier to trust people when you have similar values to them. You want to make sure they have the proper credentials, they've gone to school, they've got the education needed to be able to help you. Can you afford it? If this is somebody who you believe is taking advantage of you financially, you need to be able to build some sort of comfortable bond with them. So what is the actual rationale for preventative mental health? It's important to realize that in terms of mental health, it's all about preventing rather than curing. It sounds like we're about to be interrupted. I've got a little one upstairs who sounds like he's waking up from nap time. So let's see if he wants to make an appearance. Sounds like he's coming in. Hey, bud. That was not a very long nap, was it? Where are you? Hi, Cheeseburger. Come here.
Why?
Where are you going to go pee or poop? Okay, go pee pee. Did you already go poop? Alright. You're kind of stinky. You guys lucky this is not smell-o-vision. Anywho, we were talking about this idea. Prevention is more important. It's important when we talk about this idea of preventive mental health programs. A lot of times this happens before anybody ever gets sick, gets diagnosed. We have the concept of resilience. I've got Sean, Patrick, and Andrew. The goal is to work with kids when they're young to develop the coping skills necessary. Now obviously, the things that are going to stress out and cause anxiety and psychological trauma for adults is going to be different than that of kids. Hopefully, if kids when they suffer trauma, it's much smaller. So when they get put to bed without a story, or when they're not allowed to have dessert because their behavior was bad, whatever parenting techniques that you use, or anything that happens at the playground, not getting picked for a team, those are minor stressors. Those are going to cause some anxiety. But the goal is to teach the kid how to develop those coping skills so that when they get older, they have those skills built in when things become more serious, not getting asked to prom or not getting the scholarship that you want to get to the college that you want to get to. That's all resilience, the personal strength that helps most people cope with stress and recover from adversity and trauma. So how do we actually prevent disorders? Well, remember, the heart disorders are a combination of nature and nurture. Some disorders are very heritable, others are very much related to the environment that you're in. If we can change the environment that you're in, we're potentially removing a lot of those stressors. Even something like schizophrenia that has a high degree of heritability, if we can remove people from high stress, if we can remove people from poverty, if we can provide people with an education, there's a chance that they might end up never developing the full-blown symptoms of schizophrenia. Did you wash your hands?
Yeah.
Good job. Do you want to say hi? Look at the camera. Can you look up there? Can you say hi?
Yeah.
You don't want to say hi? Well, you're shoving the microphone right in my face. So with that, it's also about providing nurturing situations. And I'm just going to read here: foster growth, self-confidence, resilience. This has been a little bit of a wrap-up of the end of Module 72 that we didn't have a chance to cover in class. From here, I'm going to